Funding for the Hinckley Report is made possible in part by the George S. and Dolores Doré Eccles Foundation and the Cleone Peterson Eccles Endowment Fund.
Good evening, and welcome to the Hinckley Report. I'm Jason Perry, director of the Hinckley Institute of Politics. Covering the week, we have Maura Carabello, president of the Exoro Group, Brian King, Democratic State Representative, and Spencer Stokes, president of Stokes Strategies. Thank you for being here today. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about the courts, and particularly the United States Supreme Court. We have a new Supreme Court justice, the 114th member of the U.S. Supreme Court. And Spencer, I want to talk to you first for a moment. This was a promise from President Trump. He's going to put conservative candidates on the court. They got it, all right? They got it this week. The vote was close, which we'll talk about. My question for you is really this. At what cost? The Republicans got it. Will there be a cost for them getting this one through, or this part of the overall plan of the Republicans?
Look, I think there's a lot of costs here. I think both sides suffered some blows to this, going through this process. I think it actually energizes the base, Donald Trump's base, and I think that prior to this, there was not a lot that they had to look at, but Republicans have more so than the Democratic Party. I think Republicans have always been focused on the Supreme Court. Many people voted for Donald Trump because of the Supreme Court. I remember seeing the lawn sign, Donald Trump lawn sign, and right next to it, it had another lawn sign that said, because of the Supreme Court. Not a lot of Republicans, especially in Utah, are real thrilled that Donald Trump is the president, just based on his demeanor. But they are liking the nominees to the Supreme Court. And my biggest fear is that the Utah legislature, seeing that there's now a conservative on the court, is going to try to run legislation to test how conservative he is.
Well, a Democratic Senate member of our legislature, Representative King, as the minority leader in the state, you've been pretty vocal about this, not just the process, but about this pick. What do you think about that assertion?
The idea that the Utah State Legislature could test the waters? Well, I think that there are going to be some in the Utah State Legislature that'll use this, look at this as in an opportunistic way and say, hey, we've got an opportunity now to do some things at the Supreme Court level that we've been unable to accomplish at the state level because, of course, the Supreme Court jurisprudence governs the entire country. For example, people are worried about or happy about the prospect that abortion, Roe v. Wade, will be challenged. I don't know whether that'll happen. I mean intentionally in the sense that Spencer's talking about. But I do think within the next year or two we're going to see a case at the United States Supreme Court that challenges on its face Roe v. Wade and tries to get it overturned. Wouldn't surprise me either. The outcome wouldn't surprise me either way. I mean, Justice Kavanaugh said some things, Senator Collins and others, along the lines of, oh, I think Roe v. Wade is settled law. But I do think at the very least you're going to see the underpinnings of Roe v. Wade chipped away at. You're going to, as we have seen to some extent in the past, Roe v. Wade sort of minimized and reduced in terms of a bulwark for pro-choice of women in dealing with their reproductive rights. I think that'll be ongoing for the next several years, and you may very well see it completely overturned.
Maura, when you talk to people in the state of Utah, and you are an advisor to many candidates, causes in the state, are these concerns in the minds of Utahns right now? Are Utahns thinking to themselves, Roe v. Wade, make sure we get a conservative on the court because of this?
So, I mean, they're thinking about it at a higher level, which is, I think, one of the continued disturbing trends is the political gamesmanship continues to set the dialogue, sort of us and them, and what matters. We have a huge discussion, I think. As I observe, we're disconnecting between what our values are and maybe who parties and people are, and we're using these labels to set our agendas. And so I do think that Utahns are paying attention to the labels: who won, who lost, who's going to win in the future, who's not going to win in the future. And I think we saw that political gamesmanship inch closer to our courts and to our judiciary. And that's always been a hard line, right? That's always been their independence is upmost to the three prongs of our government, and it inched a little closer politics.
Well, let's hear Spencer talk about this, and Representative King too, because so many people talk about this third branch of government, right? This is the independent group. They don't make the laws, but they decide what these laws mean, right? Have we blended these two together through this process?
Look, I think it's cute that people refer to this as the independent group. It's not an independent group. It's a very, very partisan group. Presidents appoint Supreme Court nominees. They appoint them, they do their best to appoint somebody who aligns with their thought, their thinking. And if you go back to our modern presidency, which I consider, since we had 100 senators, 50 states, you see that happen over and over and
Spencer,
over again.
here's where I'll disagree. Once again, you merged ideology and values with politics. And you can have a firm point of view. And I think we've seen a lot of justices have approaches and have developed a philosophy. And that does not inherently make them political. It makes them philosophical. And the emergence of politics on top of it, I believe, is new. And I believe is harmful. And I believe if you spoke to most judges across the nation, they'll be working hard. One thing that we haven't talked much about, as we've all watched Kavanaugh day by day, is the tone of the Supreme Court during this time period. The tone of the justices. I mean, who I'm really looking for leadership is Roberts at this time. And the tone of the justices during the last couple of weeks has been very toned down. Normal, Sotomayor fighting, and they've toned it down. I think they have a sense of wanting to preserve the fact that, yes, they have a philosophy and an ideology, but that does not make them inherently political.
But I don't separate philosophy from politics. I know there are people who look at politics as a negative thing, but philosophically, I think that's what people run on. I think the two parties have a philosophy, and that's who you've seen come forward. Now, I will say that the only playbook we've seen for a nominee going in front of the Senate Judiciary Committee and defending themselves has been Clarence Thomas. It's the only time that's really happened.
Well, up until now.
Up until now. But the playbook was a very defiant Clarence Thomas attacking and going after the Senate Judiciary Committee. And if you watch the video of Clarence Thomas before the Judiciary Committee and you watch Brett Kavanaugh, he was just simply taking the page out of the Clarence Thomas confirmation playbook and was coming at the committee hard and being indignant about it.
Well,
I think he went too far.
I think he went too far. That Clarence Thomas didn't cross.
But it was still the indignant playbook.
And it was a step beyond the indignant playbook. And I think he was, as many people have said before, playing to an audience of one. He was trying to encourage and gain the support of Donald Trump.
As you know, the Supreme Court justices go in to confer about cases, and they all go into a room, all 9 of them in a room, no one else in the room, and the youngest justice, meaning the one with the least tenure on the court, basically is the one who answers the door, who gets the coffee, who does those kinds of things. It'll be very interesting, in my mind. I wish I could be a fly on the wall to see what happens when Brett Kavanaugh walks in with those other 8 justices.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things that I think we're not talking about this in a vacuum, Jason. We have at the state level the governor making the appointments to the Utah Supreme Court and all the Utah courts at the district court level on up. And so we know what it looks like, an independent judiciary looks like, a judiciary where people are chosen based on not their ideology or their politics, but on whether they are good lawyers and whether they have the prospect of being good judges, fair-minded, independent, will bring wisdom, justice, and mercy to the bench. And that's something that I think we are lacking now to a greater degree than we have in the past. And I say that because when you compare and contrast Utah to the Supreme Court and the federal judiciary, we've had a remarkable run of governors, both Democrats and Republicans, although for the last 3 or 4 decades it's been Republicans, who have committed themselves to putting people on the bench about issues, regarding things about issues above and beyond partisan politics.
But a much different process.
Well, it's not really, in the sense that you've got a group of individuals chosen by the Judicial Nominating Commission for the governor to choose from. Governor makes his choice. and then the state Senate confirms.
But we don't have that process with the United States Supreme Court or any of the federal judges.
Well, we have the process of the ABA reviewing, and we have the U.S. Senate confirming the choices made by the president. My point is, presidents don't have to make partisan or political choices in who they put on the bench, and they shouldn't. They should put the best qualified individuals on the bench. That's what we've seen in Utah. There's no reason why we can't have it at the federal level, and we've seen a degradation in that process.
Well, let's talk about that process itself in terms of whether it's philosophy or politics on this, because you've been pretty outspoken about what happened with Merrick Garland.
Right.
In particular. If Merrick Garland had been put on the bench, it would have been majority, more liberal, right?
Right.
More
well, Merrick Garland was viewed as a very mainstream, moderate voice. I mean, I think he would have leaned liberal, but I don't think that he was viewed by either conservatives or liberals as being a hardcore liberal in the way that either Kavanaugh or Gorsuch were viewed.
How would that one be viewed in the state of Utah? Are they seeing that distinction? Because the Democrats are still talking about that delay, and that tactics, seems to be something people are talking about in the press now. But in terms of the court itself, do Utahns separate the politics from the philosophy?
I don't think so. And I think one thing is universally held is that we've moved to a more conservative court, for certain. And I think that was a known thing of Kavanaugh. And I think certainly in the state of Utah that probably is a point of view that is accepted and maybe even appreciated. Mm-hmm. I do think that the one, this is a slightly different dimension, but I do think that while we may, as Utahns, maybe we agree that it moves conservative, and maybe many of Utahns believe that that's good, I do think that this in Utah had a male-female divide. And I do, so this is sort of aside from the leanings of the court. I think the process did bring up once again maybe where there's a difference between where men in America are and where women in America are.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about how this will influence some of these elections. Let's talk about the Democrats right now. What kind of opportunity is this selection? Is it motivating Democrats, or is it motivating the Republicans?
Well, I think certainly the confirmation battle motivated both bases. You had people on Kavanaugh's camp really get inflamed and upset, and then you had, of course, people in Dr. Ford's camp or the anti-confirmation group also feel that she was dealt with unfairly, that the process wasn't fair and complete. I'll tell you, I think that one of the things that Democrats are going to be talking about, I think this gender divide that Maura references is very real and has been aggravated by those goings-on in Washington in connection with the confirmation proceedings. But I'll tell you something that in my mind is as important or even more important in this election, and that is you now have Republicans controlling every branch of government in Washington, D.C., and you have Republicans controlling the legislature and the governor's office in the state of Utah. I think in the state of Utah, the judiciary is more independent. We don't think of it as being controlled by conservatives or liberals, and that's a very good thing. But when you have such large levels of control on the part of Republicans and conservatives across both the country and the state, I think Democrats can make a compelling, persuasive argument that we need to have greater balance, both in our federal delegation, in our state legislature, and we need to have other voices be heard.
Mm-hmm. Spencer, you've advised lots of Republican candidates. You've worked in Washington, D.C., even for Mike Lee, who had some things to say here in this process. Even this week, this is what they're saying, is another Supreme Court nominee that's conservative, new trade deals, great economy. Are the Republicans saying this is just a huge victory, therefore?
Well, I believe prior to this, that the base was not motivated. Donald Trump's base was not motivated. And as we know, the last election, the odds makers had a 3-1 on Hillary Clinton. And I was one of the people saying, hey, we better take Merrick Garland, because what happens when Hillary gets elected? We're going to have more liberal justices appointed. And so I think this base has been invigorated again, like it was in the last election. And I do believe I don't think Republicans are going to keep control of the House, but I do believe we'll keep control of the Senate, which is going to create a new and interesting working relationship with a very outspoken president.
But if we look at this November, I'm just going to shorten how long our attention span is, right? So as we sit in the back rooms and talk, campaigns are often about this intangible energy, this mojo behind somebody or not. not. And I do think there's this sense that in the last 2 weeks, conservatives have been very invigorated and very excited. I do think they reached many of their goals. And now you see the left side saying, hold on a minute, I'm not excited, and I'm a little ticked off. So let's take it to Utah. We drop our ballots. You have the first time to vote in 8 days. You have the first time to walk in and vote in 2 weeks. And we've got a few weeks left. And the wonder is, can the momentum of the right, is it going to drop precipitously, and the left's momentum is going to come into fold? We still have many lifetimes and political years between now and when we close the
no question.
ballots.
And if you think this is a battle, the health of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I mean,
sure.
There ought to be 2 medical doctors. Democrats ought to be walking around with her physicians, because if Ruth Bader Ginsburg, I believe she will stay until after the next presidential election, if she's alive. If she's alive. But if she unfortunately passes away, and if you haven't seen the what's the
RBG.
movie? Yeah, it's a great documentary. If she passes away, you haven't seen anything in a partisan fight.
Okay.
I'll tell you, Justice Breyer is also in, I think, his early 80s too. I mean, the 2 oldest members of the court are both on the liberal wing. So you're going to see greater insecurity on the part of people who care about the makeup of the court going forward, because anything can happen. I think the oldest member of the conservative wing of the court is Clarence Thomas, in his early 70s, which, there's a reason that the liberals and the lefties were concerned about the makeup of the court, because
these battles have gone on for 30 or 40 years, and they're going to continue to go on. They used to be voice votes. They used to take justices to the floor of the Senate, and it was a voice vote. So we haven't had a lot of actual recorded votes, but these battles have gone on. They will go on. There was retribution over Abe Fortas not becoming the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. There was punishment for that. I mean, this has been a battle that's been going on forever, and it only continues to be a battle. And the thing that frustrates me is the rhetoric. If I were to say, what's one thing you'd like to change in American politics, it's the rhetoric. Because we have had these battles, but it's like, this battle today is unprecedented. It's never been seen before. It has been.
The degree, it has been seen. You're right, Spencer. I do think the degree to which we've had the Republicans and the conservatives willing to cross boundaries that haven't been crossed before. The holding up of Merrick Garland, well, that's unprecedented, I think. The doing away with the need to get 2/3 of a vote, to go down to 50 votes.
Nixon appointed or nominated 2 Supreme Court justices back to back that were both defeated on the Senate floor.
So I'm worried that we are doing, we're using tactics, I'm going to sort of say Middle Easternizing our politics, because one of the things that continues to happen is that we all make our cases for support, then I talk about something that happened in 93, you bring up 91, you bring up 74,
right.
I bring up 64, which allows us to continue to never seek common ground, allows us to continue to enhance our own labels and our own righteousness.
I wanted to bring my high school yearbook, but my wife wouldn't let me.
We appreciate your wife putting her foot down
So
on
here's,
that one.
I want to follow up on that, Maura. If you have people that engage in tactics that are unprecedented, bad behavior, and the other side feels strongly about that, but the one side who uses the bad tactics gets something that is long-lasting, and in this case, of course, it's Justice Kavanaugh, who is 53 years old. He could be on the court for literally 30-plus years. And the effects of behaving badly and breaking the rules or pushing the boundaries are going to be felt for 30 years. How easy is it for those who are offended by that to come back in a year or 2 or 5 or even 10 years and say, all is forgiven. I'm going to take the high road. You took the low road. You won in doing so. I want to take the high road, even though it exposes me to the risk of not winning. If you don't have an effective way of punishing bad behavior,
that's right.
That's the concern that I have
That's right,
in terms
but if
of
you operate operate zero sum, continue to operate zero sum. So how do we balance that? How do we change our systems? How do we move it? And one of the key players in this that I'm going to continue to go to are the voters themselves. And so this audience maybe doesn't count because they're highly informed, but the less people are engaged, the more the professionals, and we're all there and we care deeply. We're doing it for the right reasons, but the more professional politics becomes and the less the people are participating, the systems take over.
Let's talk about the impacts of that, because you used a great phrase. This is Representative Governor John Kasich this last week had a great quote about this, exactly what you just said. He said politics right now is looked at like a zero-sum game, and everything is about I win and you lose. All right, that's kind of what he's thinking. It's a little bit what you were describing right there. How does that translate into people getting involved in the political process? Spencer, if that's the feel, you may disagree if that's what it is, but if people are feeling that way, do they disengage?
No, I think voters have been highly engaged. The 24-hour news cycle has made people pay attention. It hasn't turned out at the ballot box. We haven't seen that, even though we're making it easier and easier for people to vote and send in their ballot through by-mail voting. But it's almost like it's a score. And I'll tell you the people who I feel the most bad for the past couple of weeks has been Capitol Police. I went through security a number of times this week, and this is a group of men and women who are so frustrated. And if you could see on their face what's going on as people are coming through with banners, they've had to arrest people. They don't like to be put in this position. And if you look at them as the cross-section of the American public, they're saying, can we have a more civil dialogue? And I think if there's anything that we need to return to that John Kasich is talking about, it's a more civil dialogue. And you saw some of these reprimands come from the Senate. I mean, there were times when Chairman Grassley had to remind people of what the rules of the Senate were, where the President pro tem in the Senate had to remind people what the rules of the Senate are. And shouting in the gallery is not a civil dialogue. And so I know that there is lots of frustration, but there is a process that's been set up. And if I were to say one thing, it's that we work in high schools and colleges and across the spectrum to try to create a more civil society. And that, I think, is one thing, if I were to say there was something that could come out of this that could be positive, is to say, let's take it down a notch and have an honest discussion. Not something that happened 35 years ago. I think that's very difficult on both sides. I don't doubt either of them. Memories are difficult that long. But let's return back to a civil dialogue on these topics.
I agree with that, but here's the problem. Here's the problem, Jason. The President of the United States and the leader of one of our political parties epitomizes the zero-sum game analysis. He is a win-at-all-costs guy, and he undoubtedly, and I don't think many people would disagree with this, even the supporters of his don't disagree with this, he views his win as your loss, and he views your win as his loss. And that filters down to the people of the country, and it especially filters down to Republicans and conservatives. I believe that what Spencer's saying is the appropriate thing to do. We've got to find common ground on stuff. And in Utah, we've got a much better track record of that over the last 10, 15, 20 years than we've got on a federal level. But it's going to become increasingly difficult to the extent that Donald Trump continues to have support within the Republican Party, because they're not going to support him on some stuff and they reject this zero-sum game analysis and mentality and philosophy that he has, because he does have that.
Mm-hmm. Maura, are Utah voters a little more discerning than what's happening nationally? Will we be able to separate these issues?
So one of the things I want to always applaud Utah voters for is the dissonance they're having over Donald Trump. I mean, we've routinely seen Utah polling perform lower in terms of support, and the dissonance that I see is that they may agree with some of the conservative values he's expressing, but they don't agree with the character of the man. And I like that Utah is. I think conservatives, to Brian's point, I think conservatives can achieve higher and can actually have someone who agrees with their philosophy and has a person of character that we want representing this country. And I think
we've done it before.
And that Utahns are grappling with this in a more serious way. And I frankly like to see that Trump's numbers are low here, because in a red state, for Trump numbers to be low, that means we're digging a little deeper about who we want to represent us.
Okay, very good. I was curious about a Gallup poll this week. Only 1 in 4 young people, people who are potential voters, say they are likely to vote in this election. 1 out of 4.
So I did an analysis that we've repeated. Spencer probably has too. You know, we started in the 90s in doing this analysis. There is not a district in Utah that cannot be won or lost by college students. And I'll say college, post-secondary, that age group. There's not one district in which that population cannot change the outcome of the election. So, you know, the question is, how do we get them there?
And I agree with Maura. This is an interesting group of people. And the reason why I say that is, if you look at them, I believe they're going to change America. And they're going to change America in a different way than we even think about. And that is, they're just going to ignore the system. Because that's what you've seen. If you've looked at all of the inventions, if you will, or the platforms that have been developed, it's very populist. Uber, for example. You can go on Uber and you can just get, or Lyft, or one of the other myriads out there of platforms. They just bypass everything. They went into cities and states and they didn't even ask permission in most cases. You saw this with Bird and Lime on our streets. Just one day they dumped a bunch of scooters on the streets and said, here's the platform.
But they're getting a bad rap for being non-participants. I mean, what the data is showing us, that it's our generation that actually has been the least participatory. We have the greatest generation that's participating quite a bit, and the young people are, I like that phrase because I sound old, the young kids, they are engaging, but they're engaging electronically. One of the things I'm concerned about, so I think for philanthropic work, this is exciting, for change agent things, for regional things, but where I'm worried about it with politics, I'm a little concerned that people are confusing liking something with social activism. But in other areas of our community, the millennials are stepping up and participating.
They're just going to buy. I mean, what happens when you have solar panels on your roof and you're not paying local franchise taxes? What happens when you have a solar or an electric car and you're not paying gasoline tax? What happens when your transactions become Bitcoin? This is a group of people that is, this young group of people are saying, I'm frustrated with this, I'm going to create this.
But
well,
I agree with that,
but
you can't drop out at one, you can't participate at 1 in 4 rates and expect that you're going to have an impact on the system in the same way if you participate at the same level as the greatest generation, for example.
All right, very good. Very insightful comments today. Thank you for the dialogue. That's it for this edition of the Hinckley Report. Please join us online at kued.org/Hinckley Report. Thank you and good night.